Hello, this is Professor Sexton and a brief lecture on Shirley Jackson's The Lottery and Alice Walker's Everyday Use. In this brief lecture, I am not going to so much summarize the short stories as I am going to give you a few things that I want you to look out for as you're reading and thinking about the short stories. So let's begin with Shirley Jackson's The Lottery. Some of the things that I want you to pay attention to as you're reading The Lottery and thinking about the lottery is how this event occurs in this neighborhood every year. It's always on June 27, always in the summertime. And all of the citizens of the town, a town that we don't get the name of, willingly agree to participate in this lottery even though they know how the lottery is going to end. And what you'll see in the story that from a very young age, the citizens of that town are indoctrinated into that lottery because you see in the very beginning of the story where even the young boys are gathering stones. So they know what is going to happen. And the thing that Jackson does in the story is she deals with this issue of why we as a people tend to continue traditions, even though we no longer have a clear meaning of why those traditions first existed. And you can see this in Shirley Jackson's The Lottery with the whole emphasis on this black box. We're told that the black box is in this shabby condition and that each year one of the organizers of the lottery thinks about replacing it, but he never does. And the villagers never do as well. And so for them, this box is related to that tradition. But you also notice that in the story, a lot of the citizens don't remember the exact details of the lottery. All they know is that it has always existed and it is something that they've always done. And because it is something that they've always done, they continue to do so even though there is talk that in other villages that people have given up the lottery. And you can hear that talk between Mr. Adams and Old Man Warner while they're waiting for the lottery. And Old Man Warner is one of those people who says something along the lines, they've always been a lottery. And he thinks that talk of ending it is nonsense. And he does give a reason for it existing, but there seems to be some uncertainty there. What happens in the story, however, is that Tessie Hutchison is selected as the winner. And selected is a interesting word to use here. And it is revealed that she has quote unquote won the lottery. She begins to say it is not fair. And initially, when you're reading her, it's not fair, you might think to yourself, oh, now she's against the lottery. But what I want you to do is consider the circumstances in which she says that it's not fair. Consider this. Did she say it was not fair before she showed up? When does she say it's not fair? And even in her saying it's not fair, notice how she wants to have her husband withdraw. And so that seems to indicate that she's not really against the lottery. So look at that very carefully. But also look at the fact that she's the one who showed up late to the lottery. And what does that mean? Because she's a complicated character in this narrative. Because in some ways it seems as if she's against the lottery, but then in other ways, it seems like she's only against the fact that her family was chosen or that she was chosen to be in the lottery. So those are some situations that I want you to look at as well. Um, a lot of the literary terminology that was in that terminology sheet, you'll see come into play in the lottery. Think about the issue of foreshadowing with the boys picking up the stones. Think about who you would consider the protagonist of this story. Who's the antagonist? Is it Old Man Warner? Is it the lottery? Is it society? So there's a lot of different things there that you should consider as you're reading the lottery. On Friday, when we meet. We'll talk about the lottery in more detail, where we can kind of like tease out some of the various things that have happened in the lottery. Okay, now going to skip to the next story, Alice Walker's Everyday Use. In this story, it features three characters. Mama, and Mama is your narrator. She's the person who's telling the story. And think of mine in point of view. Point of view is also from Mama. So everything that you're getting from the story, you're getting from Mama's perspective. So you're not hearing Dee's voice and you're not hearing Maggie's voice. You're only hearing what Mama is telling us. The story is about a conflict among these three women, particularly between Mama and Dee. Dee is the eldest daughter who has gone away to college. She is more sophisticated, more educated, more articulate than her mother and her sister Maggie. And the story is about Dee's return home and how when she returns home, there's a conflict over who's going to get these quilts. These quilts are homemade quilts, hand stitched. And Mama had originally promised them to Dee when I mean, Mama had originally offered them to Dee when Dee went off to college, and Dee didn't want them because she said they were old-fashioned. Now that Dee has returned, she now wants them. But there's a larger issue here in the terms of how Mama and Dee and Maggie lives very different lifestyles. Um, you hear very early on in the story when Mama is talking about Dee, she talks about how Dee used to burn them with knowledge, which I find is always a very interesting question because I think, how does knowledge burn? But then look at the way that Mama says Dee is using the knowledge. And I think that'll give you some sense of that. And also, in reading the story, think about how often Dee is associated with fire. Um, they had an earlier house that burned down, and Dee hated that house. And then when Mama is retelling the story, which is a flashback, Mama tells a story about Dee standing back at a tree, staring at the house with this look of concentration, almost as if through her eyes, Dee has set the house on fire. And then what is very interesting is Maggie was caught in that house fire, and Maggie received burn scars. And after the tragedy of the house fire, it affected the way that Maggie views herself, in the way that she walks, in the way that she thinks of herself. And there's always this question is, did Dee start that fire? Now, here's the deal. The story never says she does. It never says she doesn't. But the way that Mama tells the story, there seems to be that association. And oftentimes in the story, Dee is associated with fire. Keep in mind, Mama said that Dee burned them with a lot of knowledge. When Dee first comes back, she's dressed in this very loud dress, and Mama describes the dress as warming her whole face. So once again, you have that emphasis of sun, and so this emphasis of Dee with fire. Also, this is a story about heritage and tradition, very different than the lottery, but still along the same lines. Dee changes her name. She changes her name to Ranjero Liwanka Kimanjo. And when she's changed her name and she tells her mother about her new name, her mother ask what happens to Dee. And Dee responds is, I can't stand being named after the people who had oppressed me. In some ways, Ranjero Dee is right. For a lot of African Americans, the names that they have is a holdback to slavery. So a lot of African Americans certain are not their real names, but are the names of the white slave owners who owned them. However, the issue for the issue for Mama and Dee is it's not so much Dee's last name, but it's Dee's first name. Because Mama tells her you were named after your Aunt Dicey, and then she was like, and she was named after someone else. So Dee's first name has a family history to it. And it's a family history that Dee either does not understand or is she doesn't know enough information about it. And you can see that consistently as Dee is going through the house, looking at different handmade objects and her obsession with those, wanting to hold on to that history. But For her, the history is invested in the object itself, not so much in the story and not behind the people who made those objects. If you're looking for history in the story, the person who knows all the details about the family history is Maggie. So whenever Dee picks up an object, Maggie can tell you the story behind that object. This relates to the quilts. Initially, Dee did not want those quilts, but now she has a new appreciation of her culture and her heritage, and now she wants them. But here's the deal. Dee doesn't know how to quilt, and Dee does not know the history of the quilts. The person who knows that is Maggie. So what you see here, you see these two different views of history. But these two different views of history in relation to Dee and Mama slash Maggie shows in every aspect of their relationship. It goes back to Dee's view of education and why she holds that education and what she does with it. While Mama has a different view of education. And so you see in this story these conflicts between these various characters and how it deals with issues of tradition, history, how we honor history and tradition. The title of the story is called Everyday Use. And one of the central conflicts is these objects, do we use them as they were intended to be used? Like, for instance, a quilt is supposed to be put onto a bed to keep you warm. And if it's been in your family for 100, 200 years, do you continue to use that quilt to keep you warm? Or do you take that quilt, frame it, protect it, and hang it on a wall so it doesn't get damaged? For Dee, you hang the quilt on a wall, you frame it, you protect it to keep it from being damaged. For Mama and for Maggie, you use the object because for them, using the object speaks more to the history. But keep in mind, Mama and Maggie also know the history of the object and they know how to create the object themselves. Everyday Use is a complicated story in a way because you initially see Dee slash Ruggiero as the villain. She's portrayed as the bad person. But keep in mind, the reason why is that you're getting the story through Mama's perspective. So this is how Mama sees Dee, or how Mama sees Ruggiero. It doesn't necessarily mean that Dee's viewpoints are wrong. Um, so you have to take that into consideration as you're reading the story. I mean, look at the three characters, look at what they talk about, look at how they act and how they react to each other. Um, it's very brief. I mean, Everyday Use is a very rich story, and just because I want to keep these lectures short, I can't go into all the details. But as you're reading Everyday Use, take note of things that you find interesting, and then when we meet on Friday for our live discussion, we can bring those points up. So there will be two discussion board posts posted today. One will be on the lottery, and the other one will be on Alice Walker's Everyday Use. I hope everyone is having a great day, and I will, quote unquote, see you again tomorrow for Wednesday's lecture. Take care, everyone, and I'll see you on Friday. Bye.